Gardening knowledge accumulates in layers. The first is what everyone knows: compost, water, sunlight, frost dates. The second is what experienced gardeners figure out after a few seasons of watching what actually works. The third layer is where things get genuinely interesting: the specific, counterintuitive discoveries that solve problems you did not even know had solutions. These 40 ideas live in that third layer. None of them appeared in any previous script on this channel. All of them are immediately applicable, and the kind of thing that, once known, quietly improves the way a garden operates for every season that follows. Soil blocks, dense cubes of compressed compost made with a hand tool that punches a small dibber hole in the top of each block for the seed, eliminate plastic seed cells from the propagation process entirely and produce transplants that establish significantly faster than module-grown equivalents. The block is held together by the compression of the compost rather than a container, which means roots that reach the edge of the block are air-pruned by exposure rather than circling indefinitely inside a plastic wall. Air pruning stops root growth at the point of exposure and triggers the development of dense, fibrous lateral roots within the block rather than a spiraling root mass that takes weeks to straighten after transplanting. At planting time, the soil block goes directly into the prepared hole without any extraction, no root disturbance occurs, and the transplant resumes growth within days rather than the week or two required for recovery from the stress of being tipped from a plastic cell. A soil blocker costs $20 to $40 and lasts decades. The only consumable is compost. Bokashi fermentation, a Japanese system that uses a specific population of beneficial microorganisms to ferment kitchen waste, including cooked food, meat, and dairy, that conventional composting cannot accept, produces a pre-composted material that can be buried directly in garden beds where it breaks down in as little as 2 to 4 weeks and enriches the surrounding soil without the lengthy process of conventional composting. The fermented material is acidic, which means it should not be applied to actively growing roots directly. Instead, bury it 20 centimeters deep between planting rows or in a trench dug specifically for the purpose, cover with soil, and allow 2 to 4 weeks before planting above it. The fermentation process retains a significantly higher proportion of the original nutrient content than aerobic decomposition, which loses a large percentage of nitrogen to the atmosphere as ammonia. Research on bokashi-amended soils found measurable improvements in microbial diversity and plant-available nutrient content compared to soils receiving equivalent quantities of conventionally composted material. Homemade seed tape, strips of toilet paper on which seeds are glued at precise correct spacing using a paste of flour and water, allows even the smallest seeds to be sown at their final spacing without thinning, which eliminates both the waste of dense sowing and the root disturbance of removing seedlings from around the ones you want to keep. Make the paste by dissolving 1 tablespoon of plain flour in a small amount of cold water, mix to a smooth consistency with no lumps, and dot it onto a strip of single-ply toilet paper at the recommended spacing for the variety being sown. Place a single seed on each dot of paste, allow to dry completely on a flat surface, and roll loosely for storage. At sowing time, lay the tape in a prepared drill at the correct depth, cover with fine soil, and water gently. The paper dissolves within days of watering, releasing each seed at exactly the planned position. The investment is 20 minutes of preparation per variety and 0 subsequent thinning. Step over fruit trees, apple or pear trees, trained as a single horizontal tier with the leader bent 90 degrees at approximately 40 centimeters above the ground and tied along a low wire parallel to the soil surface. Create a productive fruit-bearing border along any path edge that takes up less than 30 centimeters of width, provides a formal structural element to the garden, and produces a full crop of fruit from a position that would otherwise contribute nothing to the productive capacity of the growing space. Your garden shouldn't feel like a second job, but for most people it does. You don't have weekends to spare. You don't want to spend a fortune on bagged soil and fancy tools. And honestly, you're tired of working harder every season for a smaller harvest. That's exactly why I put together The Simpler Garden, a complete 15-page playbook built for gardeners who want results, not rituals. Whether you're setting up your very first bed or rescuing a plot that's already run you ragged, this book tells you exactly what to put in place so the garden does the work, not you. It's available for a limited time only. Grab it now via the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on the screen. The low horizontal leader restricts the flow of sap through the main stem, which naturally suppresses vegetative growth and directs plant energy into flowering and fruiting rather than extension growth. A row of step-over trees along a path edge requires one pruning session per year in summer, produces well in its second season from planting, and frames the garden in a way that has been used in English walled kitchen gardens for 300 years. Plant bare root trees on dwarfing rootstocks for the most compact and manageable result. Duckweed harvested from any still or slow-moving water source, a garden pond, a rain barrel that has developed a green surface layer, or a roadside ditch, contains nitrogen levels per dry weight comparable to high-quality legume hay and can be applied directly to soil as a mulch, steeped in water to produce a liquid fertilizer, or dried and worked into compost as a nitrogen activator. Duckweed doubles its biomass in less than 48 hours under warm, sunny conditions, which means a productive patch can be harvested repeatedly through the growing season without depleting the source population. Collect it with a fine mesh net or a colander, rinse briefly to remove any soil particles, and apply directly to the soil surface around heavy feeding crops like corn, squash, and brassicas, where it breaks down within 2 weeks, releasing its nitrogen in a form immediately accessible to roots. Research on duckweed as an agricultural input found nitrogen release rates comparable to blood meal at equivalent dry weight applications, making it one of the most productive free fertility sources available to any gardener with access to standing water. A hotbed, a growing frame built over a base layer of fresh horse manure packed to a depth of at least 40 centimeters, covered with a thick layer of topsoil or compost, and enclosed with a glazed frame on top, generates heat from the decomposition of the manure below the growing medium that raises soil temperature at root level to between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius for 6 to 8 weeks after construction, creating a heated propagation environment without any electricity or heating infrastructure. Fresh manure from horses fed on straw generates the most reliable heat, and the frame should be built in autumn or early spring, when the outside temperature is too cold for starting tender crops by any other method. The same principle was used in European kitchen gardens from the 17th century onward to produce cucumbers, melons, and early lettuce, months before any of those crops were possible in outdoor conditions. After the heat phase passes, the manure beneath becomes one of the most fertile growing mediums available and can be used to fill planting beds for the remainder of the season. Placing seeds that require cold stratification, most tree seeds, many perennial flower seeds, and some vegetable seeds from the Apiaceae family including parsley and parsnip, in a sealed plastic bag with a small amount of damp vermiculite and leaving them in the refrigerator for 4 to 8 weeks before sowing breaks, the dormancy that prevents germination and produces a uniform, rapid emergence that cold, sown, outdoor seeds cannot reliably achieve because outdoor temperatures fluctuate rather than staying consistently cold. Stratification in a refrigerator provides the precisely controlled cold exposure these seeds need to release the hormonal lock on germination, and the warm, consistent temperature of indoor sowing conditions immediately after stratification provides the optimal germination environment without the variable spring weather that makes outdoor germination erratic. Parsley sown after 4 weeks of refrigerator stratification germinates in 6 to 8 days compared to the 3 weeks it typically takes from direct outdoor sowing in cool spring conditions. Cucamelons, a vine crop producing grape-sized fruit that resembles a tiny watermelon and tastes of cucumber with a mild lime undertone, grow with the same cultural requirements as cucumber, but experience almost none of the pest and disease pressure that makes cucumber production challenging in most gardens. Powdery mildew, which devastates cucumber plantings in humid conditions, rarely affects cucamelons. Cucumber beetle, one of the primary pests of cucumber in North America, shows little interest in cucamelon foliage. The plants are vigorous climbers that produce prolifically over a long season, require no special treatment beyond a trellis and adequate water, and the fruit holds on the vine without deteriorating for longer than cucumber, which allows a less intensive harvesting schedule. Start seeds indoors 3 weeks before the last frost date, transplant to a sunny position with support, and expect continuous harvest from midsummer until first frost. The fruit is eaten raw, pickled, or used in any context where cucumber would be appropriate, and the novelty of the appearance alone makes it one of the most conversation-generating crops in any kitchen garden. Food-grade diatomaceous earth, the fossilized remains of microscopic aquatic organisms, ground to a fine powder with a consistency like talc, but a microscopic structure of razor-sharp edges. Applied in a ring around the base of individual plants or as a band along the edge of a bed kills slugs, snails, and soft-bodied crawling insects by abrading the protective layer of their outer surface as they cross it, causing rapid dehydration. Unlike salt-based barriers, it does not damage soil chemistry or harm plant roots at the application rates used for pest management. Unlike chemical molluscicides, it leaves no residue that accumulates in the soil or transfers through the food chain. It remains effective until wet, at which point the sharp structure is destroyed and a fresh application is needed after rain. Apply in dry conditions. Wear a dust mask during application to avoid inhaling the fine particles, and reapply after any significant rainfall or irrigation event. Food-grade diatomaceous earth, not the pool filter grade, which has been chemically altered, is available from most garden centers and agricultural suppliers. Cutting pool noodles into rings of approximately 5 centimeters width and sliding them onto the wires of a fruit cage, the ties of a staked plant, or the support wires of an espalier before threading those wires through or around woody stems protects the bark of fruit trees, shrubs, and climbing roses from the abrasion and compression damage that bare wire causes over years of contact as stems thicken and the wire bites into the bark. Wire cutting into the bark of a trained fruit tree creates a wound that does not heal cleanly, interrupts the flow of water and nutrients through the stem, and provides an entry point for fungal infection. A foam noodle ring around the wire at each contact point cushions that contact completely, allows free movement of the stem relative to the wire as wind moves the plant, and can be slid into position in seconds without tools. Cut them from any standard foam pool noodle, which costs less than $2 and provides enough rings for an entire trained fruit tree system. Suspending a colander from a hook in a bright outdoor position by attaching 3 equal-length chains or ropes to the rim creates a hanging herb garden with drainage built into the structure that most purpose-made hanging planters cannot provide. The perforated base and sides of a colander allow air to circulate through the growing medium from multiple directions, reducing the risk of waterlogging and root rot that kills herbs planted in solid-sided hanging baskets far more reliably than any other cause. The metal construction of most colanders also acts as a heat accumulator, warming the root zone above the ambient air temperature on clear days in a way that particularly benefits heat-loving Mediterranean herbs like thyme, oregano, and marjoram. Plant through the side holes as well as the top for a fully 3-dimensional planting that increases the productive surface area of the container well beyond what a flat-topped hanging basket provides. Line with coconut coir to retain the growing medium while still allowing drainage, and hang within easy arm's reach of the kitchen for continuous harvesting without a trip to the garden. Planting dahlia tubers horizontally rather than in the conventional vertical or angled position used for most tuber planting places the maximum number of growth eyes, the points from which shoots emerge, in direct contact with the warm soil layer nearest the surface, which triggers simultaneous sprouting from multiple eyes rather than the single dominant shoot that tends to emerge when the tuber is planted with one end pointing upward. Multiple simultaneous shoots produce a bushier, more branched plant with more flowering stems than a single dominant shoot ever generates, and each additional flowering stem represents additional cut flowers or blooms for pollinators through the season. Lay the tuber in a horizontal trench at a depth of 15 centimeters, ensuring the neck, the narrow connection between the old stem and the tuber, is positioned to the side rather than pointing downward, where it is most vulnerable to rot from soil moisture accumulation. This technique produces measurably more flowering stems per plant than conventional upright planting in trials conducted by dahlia specialist growers. Pre-germinating bean seeds between damp paper before sowing, exactly as one might pre-germinate tomato or pepper seeds, produces a bean planting with 100% germination in a fraction of the outdoor germination time, eliminating the gaps and failed spots in a bean row that typically occur when seeds rot in cool, wet spring soil before they have a chance to sprout. Beans germinated on paper to the point where the root tip is just visible, 2 to 3 millimeters, are planted directly at their final spacing with the root tip pointing downward, which gives each plant an immediate head start of 5 to 7 days over direct sown seed in equivalent conditions. The technique is particularly valuable in regions with unpredictable spring weather, where the window between last frost and the soil becoming warm enough for reliable bean germination is narrow. A full tray of 36 beans can be pre-germinated in 4 days at room temperature and planted out as a complete planting in one session, with no gaps and no need for gap-filling re-sowing later. Using a teaspoon rather than a dibber or pencil to lift individual seedlings from a germination tray during pricking out preserves the fine root hairs that do the actual work of water and nutrient absorption far more completely than any tool that approaches the seedling from above and pulls it upward by the stem. Slide the bowl of the spoon under the root system of each seedling and lift from below rather than grasping the stem, which compresses the fragile cells and causes the kind of invisible internal damage that produces a seedling that looks fine at pricking out but grows weakly for the next 2 weeks. The wide bowl of the spoon supports the entire root system during the brief transfer from one tray to another, reducing the time roots spend exposed to air and preventing the tearing of fine roots that contact with a pointed dibber inevitably causes. A teaspoon costs nothing beyond what is already in any kitchen, and is the most precise tool available for this task at any price. Spent mushroom compost, the growing medium left over after a commercial mushroom cultivation cycle, available cheaply or free from mushroom farms, is one of the most useful specific soil amendments for brassica growing because its characteristically high pH, resulting from the lime used in mushroom substrate preparation, raises soil acidity to a level that significantly reduces the risk of clubroot infection while simultaneously providing a rich source of partially decomposed organic matter that improves soil structure. The lime content makes spent mushroom compost unsuitable as a general amendment for acid-loving plants, but applied to brassica beds at a rate of 5 to 10 liters per square meter worked into the top 20 centimeters. It addresses 2 of the most significant challenges in brassica cultivation simultaneously, low pH and clubroot pressure, from a single low-cost input. Source it from local mushroom farms, which often give it away in quantity rather than paying disposal costs, and apply in autumn to allow it to integrate into the soil before spring brassica transplanting. Water from boiling or cooking pasta, plain, unsalted water that has absorbed starch from the pasta surface during cooking, contains measurable concentrations of carbohydrates that function as a direct food source for the microbial community in garden soil when poured around the root zone of growing plants. Soil bacteria utilize simple carbohydrates as an energy source in the same way that compost tea or fermented plant juice energizes soil biology, and a regular application of starchy cooking water, cooled to room temperature before use and never salted, provides this energy input from a waste stream that would otherwise go directly to the drain. Research on carbohydrate amendments in soil found increased microbial respiration rates, an indicator of higher biological activity, in treated soils compared to controls, which translates into improved nutrient cycling and greater availability of plant-accessible nutrients from the same soil chemistry. Applied to any actively growing bed once per week alongside regular watering, and the cumulative effect on soil biology compounds over a full growing season. Removing the lower third of foliage from tomato plants during periods of high humidity, not as a one-time pruning, but as a continuous practice of removing any leaf that develops in the lower canopy zone as it appears, prevents the still, humid air that sits closest to the soil surface from creating the conditions that initiate late blight, botrytis, and bacterial canker infections at their most vulnerable entry points. Fungal spores splashed upward from the soil surface by rainfall and watering land primarily on the lowest leaves, and a plant with no leaves below 30 centimeters provides no landing surface for this primary inoculum. Commercial greenhouse tomato producers remove lower foliage as a standard weekly management practice, specifically because the evidence for its disease prevention effect is overwhelming. The leaves removed are not the primary photosynthetic surface of the plant, the upper canopy does the majority of photosynthesis, and the improved airflow through the base of the plant reduces humidity across the entire canopy above, not just at the point of removal. Planting Mediterranean herbs, rosemary, thyme, lavender, and oregano, into their permanent outdoor position without watering for the first 7 to 10 days after transplanting, provided conditions are not actively hot and dry, encourages the root system to extend outward and downward in search of moisture rather than remaining concentrated around the root ball of the transplant. These plants evolved in habitats where water is scarce, and the root systems that survive there are those that grow toward distant moisture sources rather than waiting for moisture to come to them. A newly transplanted Mediterranean herb that is watered immediately at the root ball has no incentive to extend its roots beyond the moist zone the watering creates. The same plant denied watering begins sending roots outward within the first week, establishing connections with a much larger volume of soil that then supports the plant through drought conditions that stress or kill herbs grown with conventional post-transplant watering. This technique applies only to well-established transplants in spring or autumn, not to small seedlings, not in high summer heat, and not to any other plant family. Sealing fresh pruning cuts on fruit trees and roses with pure beeswax, melted briefly, and applied with a brush while still liquid, hardening within seconds of contact with the cool wound surface, provides significantly better protection against fungal and bacterial infection entering through pruning wounds than any commercial wound sealant, most of which contain compounds that research has shown delay rather than accelerate wound closure. Beeswax forms a flexible, breathable, entirely natural seal that expands and contracts with the wood as temperature changes, does not crack, and admit water in the way that many commercial products do when they become brittle with age, and leaves no chemical residue in the surrounding wood tissue that could inhibit the plant's own wound response chemistry. Carry a small tin of beeswax warmed over a candle flame when pruning on cold days. It remains workably liquid for long enough to seal several cuts before needing rewarming. The same tin provides enough material for several seasons of fruit tree pruning from a single annual purchase. Cold stratification of vegetable seeds that are typically sown direct, carrots, parsnips, and some brassicas, in the refrigerator for 2 weeks before spring, sowing breaks the hormonal dormancy that makes these seeds slower and less uniform to germinate than most gardeners expect. Place seeds in a sealed bag with a small quantity of damp sand, refrigerate for 14 days at 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, then sow into warm, moist soil immediately after removing from the refrigerator. The contrast between the extended cold period and the warm growing conditions encountered immediately after removal creates a strong germination trigger, producing faster, more uniform emergence than the same seeds sown at the same time without stratification. This technique is particularly effective for parsnips, a crop notorious for patchy, unreliable germination, where stratification consistently reduces the germination period from the standard 2 to 4 weeks down to 7 to 10 days under warm soil conditions, which dramatically improves the stand uniformity and therefore the yield of a planting that would otherwise require extensive gap filling. Growing oyster mushrooms from used coffee grounds collected in a sealed bag and inoculated with spent mushroom culture from the previous harvest provides a genuinely productive edible crop from a waste stream that most households generate in sufficient quantity to sustain multiple flushes of production. Coffee grounds are already pasteurized by the brewing process, making them an almost sterile substrate ready for mushroom colonization without the steam treatment required for most other growing media. Pack fresh grounds into a clear bag, add a tablespoon of spawn from a commercial inoculant or a piece of colonized substrate from a previous flush, seal loosely, and leave in a dark position at room temperature for 10 to 14 days while the mycelium colonizes the substrate. When the bag is fully white with mycelium, cut small holes in the sides, mist daily, and harvest mushrooms as they emerge and reach full cap expansion before the edges begin to curl upward. Each bag produces 2 to 3 productive flushes before the substrate is exhausted and can then be added to the compost heap where the remaining mycelium continues breaking down the carbon material. Sowing peas into lengths of standard plastic guttering filled with seed-starting compost, kept indoors or in a cold frame until the seedlings are 10 to 15 centimeters tall, and then sliding the entire root-filled column of compost directly into a prepared outdoor trench of the same dimensions, transplants peas at a stage of development that bypasses the germination and establishment phase that is most vulnerable to soil-dwelling pests and cold temperature setbacks. The guttering acts as a mold for a long, soil-filled module that slides cleanly from the channel into the outdoor trench without any root disturbance. The peas never know they have moved. This technique produces an outdoor pea planting that is already established and growing at a size that mice and slugs, the 2 primary causes of failed pea sowings, find less attractive than emerging seedlings. It also means peas can be started indoors 3 to 4 weeks before outdoor conditions are appropriate, extending the productive season and producing an earlier first harvest without any individual transplanting of individual plants. Examining the weed community growing naturally in any uncultivated section of the garden or surrounding land reveals specific information about soil chemistry and biology that no test kit provides with equivalent ecological nuance. Nettles in dense, productive stands indicate high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, typically from animal waste or decomposed organic matter accumulated over many years. Plantain, establishing on compacted paths, indicates low aeration and high compaction in the soil below. Docks appearing along the edges of beds indicate high iron and nitrogen, often in slightly acidic conditions. Clover naturalizing in grass indicates low nitrogen, which the clover is actively fixing from the atmosphere. Sorrel indicates acidic conditions. Horsetail indicates poor drainage and often a high silica substrate. Reading the weed community in a garden before adding any amendment tells you more about what the soil already has and what it lacks than any test applied to a single sample, because the weeds reflect the conditions that have prevailed over multiple seasons rather than a single point-in-time snapshot. Positioning a large mirror at the base of a wall on the shaded, north-facing side of a greenhouse or cold frame reflects additional daylight into the growing space without any electrical infrastructure, running cost, or heat generation that supplementary lighting would produce. A mirror of 60 by 90 centimeters angled at 45 degrees at the base of a north-facing wall reflects the skylight entering from above and from the south through the glazing back toward the plants growing in the shadiest part of the structure. Research on light supplementation in greenhouse production found that reflective surfaces improved light levels in the zones they were directed at by 20 to 40%, which reduced the leggy, adiolated growth that plants in shaded greenhouse positions inevitably produce. The mirror requires no maintenance beyond occasional cleaning, can be repositioned seasonally to address wherever the light deficit is most significant, and costs nothing if salvaged from a discarded piece of furniture or a bathroom renovation. Dipping the cut ends of cuttings in raw honey before inserting them into rooting medium exploits. The natural antimicrobial and enzymatic properties of honey to prevent the bacterial infection that kills cuttings before root formation can occur, while the sugars in the honey provide a direct energy source for the wound healing response at the cut surface that initiates root formation. Honey contains hydrogen peroxide at low concentrations produced enzymatically, which kills the range of bacterial pathogens most likely to colonize a cutting wound without damaging the plant tissue. Research on honey as a rooting aid found establishment rates for softwood cuttings treated with raw honey comparable to those treated with commercial indole butyric acid rooting hormone powder, with the additional benefit of significantly reduced cutting losses from bacterial rot. Use raw, unprocessed honey rather than commercially heated varieties, which have reduced enzyme activity. Dip, do not coat. A thin film on the cut surface is sufficient, and excess honey can encourage fungal colonization of the surrounding stem. Placing supermarket herb bunches, basil, mint, rosemary, thyme, and lemon verbena are the most reliable, in a glass of water on a bright windowsill and leaving them until roots develop from the stem bases produces free, rooted herb plants from what was purchased as a culinary ingredient rather than a plant. Basil stems placed in water in a warm, bright position develop visible root initials within 5 to 7 days and fully functional root systems within 2 to 3 weeks, at which point the plant can be potted into compost and grown on indefinitely. Mint roots even faster from any stem section placed in water. Supermarket herb bunches are typically inexpensive, often on sale, and provide both an immediate harvest from the leaves that are clipped as needed and a permanent plant from the stems that are placed in water simultaneously. The only varieties that do not root reliably from water are those sold as cut herbs rather than growing plants. Identify whether the stem base is still attached by looking for the fibrous root zone at the cut end. Cutting wine corks lengthwise with a sharp knife to produce flat-backed, wedge-shaped pieces that can be written on with a permanent marker and pushed into soil creates plant labels that last 2 full growing seasons. Do not blow over in wind because their wedge shape anchors them in the growing medium. Float to the surface when the bed is watered rather than sinking and becoming buried, and are waterproof without any special treatment. Standard wooden labels become illegible within one season as the marker fades in UV light and the wood absorbs moisture and warps. Plastic labels snap at the base where they enter the soil within 2 years. Cork labels neither fade nor rot at the rate that limits the usefulness of either conventional alternative, and the curved face of a cork cut lengthwise provides a writing surface that is visible from multiple angles rather than only from directly in front. A single evening of wine drinking provides enough cork material for an entire season of garden labeling. Laying a 2-inch layer of coarse grit or gravel over the surface of a heavy clay bed that regularly becomes waterlogged after rain, rather than working amendments into the clay or building raised beds above it, creates a capillary break at the soil surface that prevents the upward wicking of water from the saturated clay layer beneath, which keeps the top 2 to 3 inches of the bed drier and more aerated than the surrounding uncovered clay surface. This does not improve drainage of the deep clay, but creates a growing zone at the surface that behaves differently from the underlying material, allowing seeds to germinate and seedling roots to establish in the looser surface layer before they encounter the denser material below. As roots penetrate the clay beneath the grit layer, they open channels that gradually improve drainage at depth over successive seasons. The grit layer also warms faster than bare clay in spring, extending the sowing window, and prevents the surface capping that seals clay beds after heavy rain and prevents water from penetrating at all. Building a simple vine weevil trap from a roll of corrugated cardboard secured with a rubber band, laid flat on the soil surface beside pots and containers that have previously experienced vine weevil damage, your garden shouldn't feel like a second job, but for most people it does. You don't have weekends to spare. You don't want to spend a fortune on bagged soil and fancy tools. And honestly, you're tired of working harder every season for a smaller harvest. That's exactly why I put together The Simpler Garden, a complete 15-page playbook built for gardeners who want results, not rituals. Whether you're setting up your very first bed or rescuing a plot that's already run you ragged, this book tells you exactly what to put in place so the garden does the work, not you. It's available for a limited time only. Grab it now via the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Concentrates the adult weevils that emerge from the soil at night to feed in a refuge they cannot resist, allowing them to be collected and destroyed each morning in far greater numbers than any nighttime hand-picking patrol achieves. Adult vine weevils actively seek the kind of sheltered, enclosed hiding place that the cardboard corrugations provide, crawling into the channels to rest during daylight hours after feeding. Check the trap each morning, unroll it over a bucket of soapy water, and the concentrated adults fall in. Replace the card every few days as it becomes ineffective once wet. The trap works on the same principle as commercially sold vine weevil traps at zero cost and requires no sticky substances that make handling and disposal unpleasant. Steaming seed starting compost before use, packing it into a metal colander over a pot of boiling water, covering and steaming for 30 minutes, pasteurizes the growing medium at a temperature that kills weed seeds, fungal pathogens including the Pythium species responsible for damping off, and any insect eggs present in the mix without reaching the high temperatures that would destroy the beneficial microbial community that healthy compost contains. Damping off, the fungal collapse of seedlings at the base of the stem that occurs in the first 2 weeks after germination, is the single largest cause of seed starting failure and is almost entirely preventable through growing medium pasteurization before use. The steaming process costs nothing beyond the energy of boiling a pot of water and requires no specialist equipment. Allow the steamed compost to cool completely before sowing into it, this takes several hours, and use it immediately rather than storing it, which allows recontamination from airborne spores. A single steaming session produces enough treated compost to fill a full season's worth of seed trays. Applying liquid fertilizer to plant foliage in the late afternoon rather than in the morning, which is the standard recommendation, exploits the natural physiological process by which plants open their leaf pores most fully in the hours before and during photosynthesis begins at dawn. Stomata, the microscopic pores on leaf surfaces through which gas exchange and foliar nutrient absorption occur, open in anticipation of the morning light and reach maximum aperture in the pre-dawn hours, remaining open through the morning and closing down through the afternoon as temperature rises and the plant reduces water loss. Foliar feeds applied in the late afternoon, when stomata are beginning to close for the night, sit on the leaf surface through the evening, and are absorbed during the reopening cycle that occurs in the final hours of darkness and the first hours of morning, providing a longer contact period than a morning application that is both absorbed and evaporated by midday. The exception is in humid conditions, where late application leaves foliage wet overnight and increases fungal disease risk. In those conditions, early morning application is the correct choice. Using strips cut from old tights or stockings as plant ties for staking and training produces a material that stretches as the plant stem thickens rather than cutting in, lasts the full outdoor season without UV degradation better than jute or natural twine, and is soft enough against the stem surface that no protective padding is required between the tie and the bark. Garden ties made from conventional string, wire, or plastic can cut into stems as the season progresses, and the stem beneath them grows in diameter, creating wounds that restrict the movement of water and nutrients through the stem and produce the kind of slow, invisible damage that explains poor late-season performance in plants that looked healthy earlier in the summer. A pair of old tights provides enough tying material for an entire garden of climbing and staked plants, cuts easily with scissors into strips of any length, and can be composted at the end of the season if made from natural fiber. Planting strawberries through X-shaped cuts in a sheet of black landscape fabric laid over a prepared bed before planting rather than after establishing the plants eliminates weed germination from the bed entirely for the 2 to 3 year productive life of the planting, keeps the developing fruit elevated above the soil surface on a clean synthetic surface that prevents the soil splash and slug contact that causes gray mold in fruit resting on bare ground, and warms the soil beneath the black surface by several degrees compared to an unmulched bed, which advances fruiting by 1 to 2 weeks in spring. Secure the fabric edges with landscape pins or soil to prevent wind lifting, cut the planting holes just large enough to accommodate the crown of each plant, and water through the holes directly at the crown rather than overhead. The fabric itself suppresses annual weeds completely and significantly reduces perennial weed establishment, removing the single most labor-intensive management task from a strawberry planting for its entire productive life. Forcing garlic greens indoors, taking a full bulb of culinary garlic from any stock in the kitchen, placing it in a shallow container of water with the base just touching the surface, and positioning it in a bright windowsill produces a continuous supply of mild, garlic-flavored green shoots that can be snipped like chives within 10 to 14 days, long before any outdoor garlic crop is available. The bulb uses its stored reserves to push new growth from each clove simultaneously, producing multiple green shoots in a compact cluster without requiring any soil, any fertilizer, or any growing infrastructure. The flavor of the green shoots is significantly milder than raw garlic clove and more similar to the garlic chive, useful wherever a mild garlic note is wanted without the intensity of fresh clove. Each bulb produces 2 to 3 cuts before the stored reserves are exhausted, at which point it can be composted and replaced with a fresh bulb. This indoor crop produces from autumn through winter when nothing from the outdoor garden is available, filling large terracotta pots with dry sand and positioning them in areas of the garden most vulnerable to frost, against walls beside tender plantings, at the entrance to a polytunnel or beside a cold frame, creates a passive thermal battery that absorbs heat throughout the day and releases it slowly through the night, raising the temperature around tender plants by 1 to 3 degrees in the critical hours before dawn when the lowest temperatures of the night occur. The thermal mass of the sand retains heat significantly longer than the surrounding air or the soil surface because of its high specific heat capacity, and the dark terracotta surface absorbs solar radiation efficiently during the day. Position the pots in direct sun for maximum heat accumulation and as close as possible to the plants requiring protection. The warming effect diminishes with distance and is most pronounced within 1 to 2 meters of the thermal mass. This technique costs nothing beyond the initial placement of existing containers and operates every night without intervention. Sowing a nurse crop of fast-establishing annual grasses, oats, barley, or a commercial nurse crop mix, Among the perennial plantings of a newly established fruit forest, perennial vegetable bed, or wildflower meadow provides structural support for delicate young perennial plants in their first season, reduces weed pressure from opportunistic annual weeds that would otherwise colonize the bare soil around newly planted perennials, and creates a sheltered microclimate at ground level that maintains the humidity and temperature stability that perennial root systems need during establishment. The nurse crop is sown at half the normal rate to avoid excessive competition with the permanent plants, grows to a moderate height that provides shelter without shading, and is cut down in late summer before setting seed, becoming a mulch layer over the root zone of the perennials for winter. By the following season, the perennial plants are established enough to occupy the space without any nurse crop support, and the nurse crop is not reseeded. Building a bee hotel from a block of untreated hardwood with holes of varying diameters drilled to a depth of at least 8 centimeters, ranging from 3 millimeters for the smallest solitary bee species to 10 millimeters for the largest. And mounting it in a position that receives morning sun on the entrance face provides nesting habitat for the solitary bee species that are among the most effective pollinators in any kitchen garden, including mason bees and leafcutter bees that significantly outperform honeybees at pollinating early season fruit blossom in cool temperatures. Solitary bees work at temperatures several degrees below the threshold at which honeybees remain in the hive, making them the primary pollinators of apple, pear, and plum blossom in cool spring conditions when the weather is too cold for social bee foraging. A bee hotel positioned near the fruit garden increases solitary bee nesting density in the immediate area, which translates directly into improved fruit set in the following season. Use only untreated wood. Preservatives are toxic to the larvae developing inside, and mount at a height of 1 to 2 meters where morning sun reaches the entrance holes first. Withholding water from tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers for 7 to 10 days before harvest, not to the point of wilting, but to a point of mild stress where the surface of the growing medium dries and the plant draws on subsoil moisture, concentrates the dissolved solids in the developing fruit by reducing the water content of the cells without stopping fruit development entirely. This technique, used deliberately by commercial tomato growers to improve the flavor concentration of their crop, produces fruit with measurably higher sugar and acid content than fruit grown with consistent moisture through to harvest. The Brix reading, the sugar content measurement used in commercial produce quality assessment, increases by 15 to 20% in mildly water-stressed tomatoes compared to consistently irrigated controls in research trials. The window for applying this technique is the final week before the first planned harvest of each successive flush, not a sustained drought across the entire season, which would damage the plant and reduce total yield. Apply it specifically and deliberately in that final week, and the result is fruit that tastes the way tomatoes are supposed to taste. The most useful thing any of these 40 ideas shares with the others is the underlying principle that drove their discovery. Someone looked at something that everyone else was walking past and asked whether it could be different or better or simpler or more productive than the accepted approach. The plastic cell tray is the accepted approach to propagation. The soil block is the result of asking whether there was a better one. The purchased wound sealant is the accepted answer to pruning cuts. Beeswax is the result of questioning whether the purchased product was actually the most effective option. The accepted approach in any garden is whatever the majority of people do, which is not the same as what works best. Extend strawberry harvest over several weeks by planting a mix of early, mid, and late season varieties rather than a single variety. Most strawberry beds are planted with a single variety that produces one overwhelming flush of fruit over a 10 to 14 day window. A deliberate mix of early glow, an early variety, with Honioye for mid-season and Jewel for late production, extends the harvest window to 6 or 7 weeks without any additional bed space. The total yield from a mixed planting is comparable to a single variety bed, but the distribution over time makes the harvest manageable rather than frantic, and fresh strawberries are available for a meaningful portion of the early summer rather than for 2 intense weeks. Use a chopstick or pencil to make planting holes for seedlings rather than a finger or a trowel. A finger pressed into the soil creates a compacted-sided hole that restricts root expansion as the seedling establishes. A narrow stick pushed into loose soil creates a clean, uniformly sized channel that closes gently around the seedling's root without compacting the surrounding soil. The difference is subtle but measurable. Seedlings transplanted into stick-made holes establish in roughly half the time of those planted in compacted holes, because roots can penetrate the surrounding soil immediately rather than working through the compacted zone the finger created. For shallow-seeded crops like lettuce and carrots, a chopstick drawn along the soil surface creates a perfectly consistent shallow furrow more reliably than any garden tool sold for the purpose. Ferment tomato seeds before storing them for next year's planting. Fresh tomato seeds are surrounded by a gel coating that contains germination inhibitors, compounds that prevent the seed from sprouting inside the fruit. Commercially cleaned seeds have this coating removed through processing. Home-saved seeds, fermented in water for 2 to 3 days, have the gel coat removed by the microbial activity in the water, which also kills many of the seed-borne fungal pathogens that cause damping off in young seedlings. Fermented, dried, and stored seeds show higher germination rates than seeds dried directly from the fruit without fermentation. The process requires only a small jar of water, the seeds, and 3 days of patience before rinsing, drying on a paper plate, and storing in a labeled envelope. Wrap the trunks of young fruit trees with hardware cloth or metal mesh from soil level to 2 feet above the ground before winter arrives. Voles and mice tunnel under snow and through leaf litter to reach the bark of young trees, girdling the trunk by feeding on the cambium layer just below the surface. A girdled tree cannot move water and nutrients from roots to canopy and dies the following spring despite appearing healthy through winter. Trunk wraps prevent this loss, which is significant because a fruit tree that took 3 years to establish and was beginning to produce fruit cannot be replaced quickly. The hardware cloth installation takes 5 minutes per tree and costs a few dollars for enough material to protect a small orchard. Plant a green manure crop, buckwheat, winter rye, crimson clover, or mustard, in any bed that finishes its primary crop before September. A bed cleared of beans in August or tomatoes in September left bare through winter loses topsoil to erosion, forms a surface crust that impedes spring water infiltration, and provides no organic matter input. A green manure sown immediately after the primary crop establishes within 2 to 3 weeks and grows through fall, adding root mass that builds soil structure. Winter-killed varieties like buckwheat break down naturally and are incorporated into the soil in spring without tilling. Cold-hardy varieties like winter rye continue growing in early spring, suppressing weeds, and are cut and dug in 4 to 6 weeks before the next crop is planted. The bed that was empty is now richer than the one that received amendments. Install a simple weather station or thermometer at soil level in the garden rather than relying on air temperature readings from a phone app. Air temperature and soil temperature are different measurements, and soil temperature is the one that determines whether seeds germinate, whether transplants establish, and whether root crops develop at their expected rate. Most gardening advice gives planting dates based on air temperature or calendar date. Plant after the last frost. Plant when temperatures stay above 50 degrees. When the relevant measurement is actually a few inches underground. A soil thermometer that costs $8 to $10 answers the actual question: is the ground warm enough for this seed to germinate right now? For crops with specific soil temperature requirements, corn, melons, peppers, the difference between guessing from air temperature and measuring at soil level is frequently the difference between a successful stand and a failed one. Make a simple liquid fertilizer by filling a 5-gallon bucket halfway with comfrey leaves, weighing them down with a brick, filling the bucket with water, and leaving it covered for 3 to 4 weeks. The result is a dark, pungent liquid concentrate that dilutes at a ratio of roughly 1 part concentrate to 15 parts water before application. Comfrey accumulates potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace minerals from deep in the soil through its long taproot, concentrating those nutrients in its leaves. The fermented liquid releases those nutrients in a plant-available form that works as quickly as a commercial liquid fertilizer. A single established comfrey plant produces enough leaf material for multiple batches of fertilizer throughout the growing season, and comfrey grows vigorously in partial shade with almost no attention once established, the most productive free fertilizer source available in a working garden. The final 10 ideas come from a previous video, and they hold up worth repeating because the gardeners who got the most out of them went back to that video multiple times. The tips that sound too simple to matter are almost always the ones that change the most about how a garden actually performs, and these 10 are the ones that come up most in the conversations and comments from gardeners who tried them. Tip 31. Coffee grounds mixed with eggshells at a 3-to-1 ratio, dried before application, applied no deeper than half an inch around acid-loving plants once a month during the growing season. Tip 32. Newspaper weed barriers laid 10 sheets thick, wetted thoroughly, and covered with 3 inches of mulch, a method that lasts 2 full seasons and builds better soil as it breaks down. Tip 33. Horizontal tomato planting, burying the entire stem in a trench and leaving only the top cluster of leaves exposed, producing a root system large enough to increase fruit yield by up to 50%. Tip 34. 1 uncoated aspirin dissolved in a gallon of water used to water transplants, reducing shock by activating the plant's natural immune response. Tip 35. Milk jug drip irrigation. Holes punched near the bottom of a buried gallon jug that delivers water directly to the root zone at a rate that eliminates evaporation and reduces water use by up to 70%. Tip 36. Cinnamon dusted on seedling trays before planting to prevent damping off, applied to fresh cuttings to seal against infection, and sprinkled around ant problem areas as a chemical-free deterrent. Tip 37. The vinegar and baking soda soil test, a 30-second method for identifying whether a soil is alkaline, acidic, or neutral before spending money on amendments. Tip 38. Epsom salt, 1 tablespoon per gallon of water, applied to tomatoes and peppers every 2 weeks to address magnesium deficiency and improve chlorophyll production, applied at soil level only and not overused. Tip 39. Blended banana peel fertilizer, peels frozen, then blended with water into a slurry and poured at the base of flowering plants every 2 weeks during blooming season, delivering potassium immediately rather than waiting months for a whole buried peel to break down. Tip 40. Beer traps for slugs, shallow containers buried with their rim half an inch above soil level, filled with cheap beer, emptied every 3 days, set near the plant slugs target most, in quantities that reveal how many slugs a single garden can quietly support. 40 ideas, most of them free. All of them the result of someone paying closer attention to what was already in the garden than the people around them. The gardener who knows these things doesn't have a better plot of land or more time or a larger budget. They just know what the rest of the gardening world hasn't caught up to yet. The gap between a frustrating garden and a productive one is almost never the soil or the weather or the seeds. It's the 20 minutes spent learning something that changes everything about how the next season goes.
Plants have relationships with each other that gardeners have observed for centuries. Some combinations help both plants thrive. Others are disasters waiting to happen. Knowing which is which can make a real difference in your harvest. Basil planted next to tomatoes does something interesting. The strong scent of basil confuses and repels aphids and other pests looking for tomato plants. Old-timers swear the tomatoes taste better too, though science has not confirmed that part. Either way, you are growing 2 useful plants in the same space and protecting both. Nasturtiums are the sacrificial heroes of the garden. Plant them near squash, cucumbers, or anything else aphids love. The aphids flock to the nasturtiums instead and leave your vegetables alone. You might lose some nasturtiums, but they are easy to grow, and you would rather lose nasturtiums than your squash. Marigolds do something remarkable underground. Their roots release a compound that kills root knot nematodes, microscopic worms that attack plant roots. Plant marigolds throughout your vegetable garden, and you are treating the soil for years to come. Chives around roses help prevent black spot fungus, one of the most common rose diseases. The sulfur compounds in chives seem to create an environment the fungus does not like. None of this requires special products or complicated techniques. Just put the right plants next to each other and let them do what they naturally do. There is a way to start new garden beds that requires even less effort than planting companions. 15. The cardboard box garden bed method. Starting a new garden bed the traditional way means removing grass, digging up soil, fighting roots, and destroying your back for an entire weekend. There is an easier way that works better and costs nothing. Flatten cardboard boxes and lay them directly on the grass where you want your new bed. Do not bother removing the grass first, just put the cardboard right on top of it. Use plain brown cardboard without heavy printing or glossy coatings. Remove any tape or staples. Cover the cardboard with about 6 inches of compost and soil mix. You can plant directly into this layer right away. What happens underneath is beautiful. The grass, cut off from light, dies and decomposes. The cardboard breaks down over the season, eaten by earthworms who love the stuff. By the following year, you have incredibly rich, loose soil where there used to be lawn. No digging required. This method is called sheet mulching or lasagna gardening. It works because you are not fighting nature, you are working with it. The decomposition process adds organic matter and brings earthworms to aerate the soil. The cardboard also prevents weeds from coming up through your new bed. It is doing 3 jobs at once while you do almost nothing. All those delivery boxes piling up in your garage finally have a purpose beyond making the recycling bin overflow. An afternoon of laying cardboard beats a weekend of back-breaking sod removal. What you do after your plants are established matters, just as much as how you start them. Pruning at the wrong time costs you flowers. Every spring, someone in the neighborhood cuts back their forsythia in March, and then complains they got no flowers. This happens every single year. The same mistake, the same disappointment, the same confusion about what went wrong. Spring. Blooming shrubs like forsythia, lilac, and azalea form their flower buds the previous summer and fall. Those buds sit there all winter waiting for warm weather. When you prune in late winter or early spring, you are cutting off every single flower the plant prepared. You have basically given the shrub a haircut right before prom. The rule for spring bloomers is simple. Prune immediately after flowering. That gives the plant a whole summer and fall to grow new wood and set buds for next year. Miss that window, and you either skip pruning entirely or sacrifice the flowers. Summer. Blooming plants work differently. Roses, butterfly bush, and many hydrangeas bloom on new growth that happens in the current season. You can prune these in late winter while they are dormant, because they have not made their flower buds yet. New growth comes, flowers follow. There is an old test that helps you figure out the right timing. Make a small cut on a branch. If you can count to 3 before you see any sap appear, the plant is dormant enough to handle pruning. If sap flows immediately, wait a bit longer. Getting this wrong does not hurt the plant. It just means you wait a whole year to see blooms again. Something happening inside your house can help everything growing outside. 17. Cooking water is liquid gold. Every time you boil pasta, steam vegetables, or hard cook eggs, you pour valuable stuff straight down the drain. That cooking water contains nutrients that plants actually want. Pasta water is full of starch. Vegetable water has leached vitamins and minerals. Egg water picks up calcium from the shells. None of this is enough to replace actual fertilizer, but it's a free supplement that adds up over time. The process couldn't be simpler. After cooking, set the pot aside and let the water cool completely. Hot water kills roots. This is important. Once it reaches room temperature, pour it directly on your houseplants or into the garden. Potato water is especially good because it's loaded with starch that feeds beneficial microorganisms in the soil. Those microorganisms break down organic matter and make nutrients available to plants. You're feeding the soil food web, which feeds your plants. If you cook most nights, you generate enough free plant food to maintain a small container garden without buying any supplements. The watering you do anyway now comes with a bonus. There are a few things to avoid. Don't use water that's heavily salted. Don't use water from cooking fatty or oily foods, and always, always let it cool down first. My grandmother saved every drop of cooking water in a bucket by the sink. At the time, I thought she was being excessive. Turns out she knew exactly what she was doing. The kitchen provides another weapon against common garden pests. 18. The garlic spray pest deterrent. Commercial pesticides work, but they kill everything. Beneficial insects die alongside the pests. The balance in your garden gets thrown off, and sometimes you end up with worse problems than you started with. Garlic spray takes more effort, but it targets only the creatures you want gone. Aphids, spider mites, and Japanese beetles hate it. bees and ladybugs do not seem bothered by it. Making it requires a blender and some patience. Take 2 whole garlic bulbs, not individual cloves. Blend them with 1 quart of water until completely liquefied. Strain the mixture through cheesecloth or an old t-shirt to remove the chunks. Add the strained liquid to a 1-gallon spray bottle and fill the rest with water. Let the mixture sit for 24 hours before using. This waiting period allows the sulfur compounds to fully release into the water. Spray it on plant leaves early in the morning, coating both the tops and undersides where pests hide. The spray needs reapplication after rain, since it washes off easily. Plan on spraying every week or 2 during pest season, and again after any significant rainfall. Fair warning: your garden will smell like an Italian restaurant for a day or 2 after each application. The neighbors might wonder what you are cooking. Vampires will definitely stay away. The cost is pennies compared to commercial products, and you know exactly what is in it. How you build your garden beds affects everything that grows in them. 19. Why raised bed? Depth matters more than you think. Raised beds are popular for good reason. They drain well, warm up faster in spring, and save your knees from ground level work. But most people build them too shallow and then wonder why their vegetables underperform. 6 inches of soil depth works fine for lettuce, radishes, and herbs. These shallow-rooted crops do not need much space below ground. But if 6 inches is all you build, that is all you can grow successfully. Tomatoes need at least 12 inches of soil depth. Their roots want to go deep, searching for water and nutrients. In a shallow bed, they hit bottom, spread sideways, and the plant struggles. The same goes for peppers, squash, and most fruiting vegetables. 12 inches minimum for these. Root vegetables require even more. Carrots planted in 8 inches of soil do not have room to grow straight down. They fork, twist, and turn into strange shapes that are hard to peel and cook. Give them 12 to 18 inches of loose soil, and they grow long and straight like they are supposed to. Building deeper costs more in lumber and soil. That extra $50 or so pays for itself within 1 growing season in better harvests. Think of it as an investment that returns dividends in tomatoes. Deeper beds also hold moisture longer during hot spells. The roots have somewhere cool and damp to retreat to when the surface bakes in summer sun. There is a timing trick that extends your harvest without building anything.
If this gave you something new to take outside, subscribe to Ageless Acres so you never miss what we discover next. And if you want to go deeper with us, exclusive guides, early access, and a community of gardeners who think just like you, join the Ageless Acres membership community, where we share the details, the failures, and everything in between. And for the books and research behind everything we cover, visit our book library. The link is in the description or right on the channel page.